In February of this year, the Trump administration ordered every federal agency to stop using Anthropic's AI technology. The Pentagon declared Anthropic a supply chain risk, a designation normally reserved for foreign adversaries. The president called them, on Truth Social, left-wing nut jobs. That was 11 weeks ago. Today, the New York Times reported that the White House is now considering an executive order that would let the government review every major AI model before it's released to the public, and that officials briefed executives from Anthropic, Google, and OpenAI about the plans last week. The same administration that ripped Anthropic out of the federal government is now meeting with Anthropic about the future of AI oversight. To understand why this is happening, you need the full timeline, because the story of how Washington went from banning AI to vetting it in 11 weeks is one of the most politically revealing things that has happened in the technology industry this year. Start at the beginning. Anthropic, the company behind the Claude AI models, had a contract with the US military to supply its technology for defense applications. The Pentagon wanted that contract to allow unrestricted military use of Claude, including, according to Anthropic, for mass surveillance of Americans and for deployment in fully autonomous weapons. Anthropic said no. Its CEO, Dario Amodei, said the company could not in good conscience agree to language that would allow those safeguards to be disregarded at will. The administration's response was swift and unusually public. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth designated Anthropic as a supply chain risk. Trump wrote on Truth Social that most agencies must immediately stop using Anthropic's AI. He also said Anthropic could face, and this is a direct quote, major civil and criminal consequences. The AI industry took note. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman publicly sided with Anthropic, saying the Pentagon's demands were threatening and that most of the AI field shared the same red lines. Google and OpenAI, notably, had already signed agreements allowing the Pentagon to use their models, but both companies claimed those deals respected the same two limits Anthropic had drawn. The fight stunned Silicon Valley, a company being threatened with supply chain risk designation, a designation typically used for Chinese firms for declining to remove its own safety policies, was a new and alarming precedent. Then, quietly, the temperature started to change. Multiple sources told Axios that while key players at the Pentagon remained dug in, other stakeholders believed the fight had been counterproductive and were looking for a way out. One source described the White House's thinking as, save face and bring 'em back in. White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent met with Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei, a meeting both sides described as a productive introductory conversation about how the company and government could work together, a meeting that would have seemed impossible in February. The reason for the shift isn't hard to identify. Anthropic's most powerful model, Claude Mythos, the same model that the cybersecurity community has been discussing since April, was something the government wanted access to. The NSA was already using it, federal agencies across the government were asking for it, and the Pentagon's own battle with Anthropic was making all of that more complicated. The supply chain risk designation had started to hurt the government more than it hurt Anthropic. Which brings us to today. The New York Times reported this morning that the Trump administration is considering an executive order to create an AI working group, a formal body bringing together tech executives and government officials to examine oversight procedures for AI models. The most significant element is one specific proposal: a formal government review process for new AI models before they are released to the public. This is a substantial reversal from the administration's stated position. On his first day in office in January 2025, Trump revoked a Biden executive order that required developers of AI systems posing risks to national security to share safety test results with the government before release. At the time, the administration framed that as removing red tape and giving the industry room to compete with China. Now, according to the Times, the same administration is considering something structurally similar, a government vetting process for frontier AI models. The stated trigger is Anthropic's Mythos model, which cybersecurity experts have described as capable of dramatically accelerating complex cyber attacks. A White House official declined to confirm or deny the report. The statement, "Any policy announcement will come directly from the president." Discussion about potential executive orders is speculation. If the executive order moves forward, what would a government review process for AI models actually look like in practice. The reporting doesn't provide full details. This is still at the deliberation stage. But the Biden-era precedent it most closely resembles required AI developers to share safety test results with the government before public release, using powers under the Defense Production Act. It didn't give the government a veto over releases, but it created a mandatory disclosure window. A Trump version could be narrower, focused specifically on frontier models with identified national security implications, or broader, depending on how the working group defines its scope. The involvement of Anthropic, Google, and OpenAI in last week's briefings suggests the administration is at least consulting the industry rather than dictating to it. The AI companies have mixed incentives here. On one hand, mandatory government review adds friction to release timelines in a race where every week matters. On the other hand, a formal government oversight framework, one that legitimizes the safety-first approach companies like Anthropic have publicly championed, could benefit the companies that already have strong safety practices over rivals who don't. It is not lost on observers that this policy shift, if it happens, would most directly affect the companies that have invested most heavily in safety research. That's Anthropic, the company Trump called left-wing nutjobs 11 weeks ago. Step back and the shape of what's happening becomes clearer. The Trump administration came into office with a stated policy of deregulating AI to outcompete China. The hands-off approach was framed as American industry unleashed, in contrast to Europe's regulatory frameworks and in preparation for a technology race where being first matters. Then Anthropic's mythos landed, a model that, according to the government's own security agencies, can find and exploit vulnerabilities in virtually any software on Earth. The NSA wanted it. The Pentagon was fighting with the company that made it, and a public report from Anthropic itself acknowledged the cybersecurity capabilities were dangerous enough to withhold from general release. At that point, a hands-off approach stops being a competitive strategy and starts looking like a national security liability. The administration appears to have done that calculation and changed course. Whether the executive order arrives, and what it actually contains when it does, will determine whether this is a genuine shift in US AI policy or a face-saving gesture designed to repair one specific relationship. The difference matters enormously for the companies involved, for the government agencies that depend on their technology, and for everyone who uses AI tools built on these models. The Reuters and Bloomberg reports confirming the NYT story, the Axios deep dive on the Anthropic reversal, and the PBS NewsHour timeline of the Pentagon fight are all linked in the description. This story is moving fast. There may be an executive order as soon as this week. Subscribe to stay ahead of it. Thanks for watching.